Hi everyone, so welcome to the business briefing webinar for creating a mentally healthy workplace. My name's Lauren Kerrison and I work for the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry as their work health and safety facilitator. Joining me today is guest speaker Wendy French, but I'll introduce her shortly after my first few slides. Just quickly, this is recorded and I ask that all users please go on mute for the duration of the webinar. Okay, so just quickly for the first 5 minutes, I'll be going through Head for Work. So Head for Work is an online tool that helps workers, supervisors and managers understand their capability and opportunities with mental health in the workplace. Head for Work is free for all Tasmanian businesses thanks to WorkCover Tasmania, and it's available 24/7 with over 40 videos and checkpoints available. Head for Work is broken down into 3 stages. So step 1 is to know what you don't know. So by completing the interactive quizzes, you'll be identifying any skills or knowledge gaps you might have about workplace mental health. Here is an example screenshot of the quizzes homepage. So you can see each one says for everyone, which means all employee levels in your organisation. Depending on your position, you'll also have quizzes available for supervisors and management level as well. Then step 2, so personalised learning. So Head for Work will then point you to their range of videos, checklists and links specific to what you need to know. And again, here's a screenshot example of the videos page. So your available videos will be tailored for you depending on your quiz results. And then the last stage is to reset only the questions you missed. So after getting feedback about any questions you may have answered incorrectly, you'll have the opportunity to test your knowledge of these areas again. Once those 3 steps are completed, managers can access a report detailing their organisational scores. So this is an example of a management's dashboard. You can see on the top row there are 10 users under everyone, and 6 out of 10 of the users have completed these. And then on the bottom or towards the right-hand side, you'll see there are 3 users, which are the manager and supervisor level users. The results are categorised into green, amber and red, depending on the quiz results. And you can see what those mean. So green is 1 to 2 attempts and orange is 3 to 5 attempts. And this organisation from a screenshot looks to be in a pretty good position. Using Head for Work, use Head for Work as part of your mentally healthy workplace journey. So it should be a stepping stone and a tool to help you understand your organisation's needs. And again, it's free to all Tasmanian businesses, and all those that have joined today, I'll send through a link to access Head for Work. So I'll now be handing over to Wendy. I'll let her introduce herself, but she has extensive knowledge of mental health in all aspects of life, but also in the workplace.
Technologically challenged. I think the hair colour tells the story on that. So please bear with me as we go through. I know a bit more about mental health than I do about computers, just quietly. So hopefully that's coming up on the screen for you all now.
That is good.
Hope everybody's got a cuppa of choice in front of them. And I'm down at Gravelly Beach and it's freezing down here this morning. So I hope you're all tucked up and warm wherever you are. Just a bit of disclosure, I've got Ugg boots on underneath, but I'm not going to let you look at those. So today we're going to look at creating a mentally healthy workplace. In brief, you know, it's I guess I didn't always work in the area of mental health and suicide prevention, which I've done for the past 12 years. I have a fairly diverse background. Encompassing, I guess, management roles in 5 international Fortune 500 companies at state, national and local level, not only in the corporate sector, but also working with the military, not-for-profit, government and NGO organisations. But 12 years ago, I implemented and managed a service for people who were bereaved through suicide here in Tasmania, which I subsequently managed for 5 years. And then I worked around Australia with communities that were experiencing a higher than normal number of suicides to help them recover from their loss and to put plans in place. And I think it's become very evident that we need to understand the role of good mental health. You know, when we talk about mental health, we often correlate that to mental illness, but good mental health is something that we need to strive to obtain and to maintain. And I think the workplace plays a vital role in that. We'll look at some of the reasons why as we go through this morning. So as we go, if you do have questions, please pop them in the chat, and Lauren will either feed them through if they need to be addressed right now. Otherwise, we will have a Q&A at the end as well. And we will, after this, you'll also be able to access this video and make contact to ask subsequent questions. But, I think anybody who does manage staff faces a range of unique challenges, and particularly in our current world. So it's essential that we take care of ourselves, particularly those of us like me who run our own businesses and in small business. And if you're employing staff, that you look after your staff as well. So we'll look a little bit at that today as we go through. I guess this is a question that nobody would say no to. Of course, we want our people to be thriving, healthy and happy, but unfortunately, the research and the statistics are pretty much stacked up against you. And if we have a look at this slide, this will give us some of the answers as why that is. A recent workplace survey showed that 74% of people at work are reported feeling unduly stressed. And we know that 90% of mental disorders actually are attributed to mental stress. 6% of all workers' compensation claims now in Australia are attributable to mental disorder. So, it's becoming quite expensive for Australian business. It's costing us about $10.9 billion a year. Now, despite all those statistics, and also, I guess 1 in 6 of the population at any given time will be experiencing a mental health problem. If not a diagnosable illness, then certainly a mental health problem such as worry, sleep, fatigue, mental illness as well included in that. Now, despite all of those numbers, 52% of people that were interviewed in that survey, managers, believe that they would never have to manage somebody with a mental illness. So it's something that we do need to be aware of, and we need to get in front of the game. So today we're going to look at mental health versus mental illness and a little bit of an overview on that. Mental health at work, what's the role, what's the contribution of work in that, and what can you do to prevent risk in your workplace? How you might look at some ways of managing performance, where performance has become an issue, and there might be a need for mental health support as well. And most importantly of all, how do you look after yourself while you're doing all of those things? So we're now looking at, I guess, quite an increase with COVID and so forth, which we'll look at. But this is a concept that we're all now very familiar with, aren't we? Identify hazard, assess and control risks, monitor and review. My dad worked at the rail and cement works, and he never wore any of this gear. He probably wore a helmet down in the quarry if they were blasting, and maybe some boots, but certainly no fluoro. It was the navy blue and the khaki King G overalls. But we know now that we need to be seen to be safe. What we've been late to come to the table with is this area, psychological safety. And workplace health and safety legislation means that steps must be taken to ensure that the working environment doesn't harm an individual's mental well-being or aggravate an existing condition. So as an employer, that's a fairly big legal imperative. And it can be tricky because there's no onus on an employee to actually disclose to you if they are experiencing a mental health condition, unless there's a risk to them or another worker in continuing to work. So it can make it a little bit difficult. So we need to get a little bit ahead of the game in learning how can we recognise if somebody's at risk and what can we do to minimise those risks, which we'll look at today. But 4 broad areas of legislation that you might need to be across when you're dealing with this issue. Really, workplace health and safety, each state has its own legislation, but this is the fundamental. Disability Act that provides policy, a requirement for policies that spell out how are you going to manage mental health in your workplace. And if somebody does present with a mental illness, how will you, just the same as if they present with a physical illness, how will you manage that? If they need time off work for a mental illness, how will you manage their return to work? Much the same as for a physical illness. The Fair Work Act also provides protection for employees with a mental illness from adverse actions taken by an employer. And one that's important is also the Privacy Act. When a worker discloses that they have a mental illness, that information can only be utilised, for the the reason for which they disclosed it to you. Now, that can be something that you can let your employees know, because often it's that fear of disclosure that, you know, if I talk about it at work, then, you know, where does that information go? Letting your employees know that those policies are there to protect them. You know, if you are unwell, if you become unwell, this is how we handle it. This is how we'll look after you, just the same as for the body. The good news is that for every dollar that you spend investing in creating a mentally healthy workplace, a recent PricewaterhouseCoopers survey indicated that the return on investment is a minimum of $2.30 to 1. So it makes good business sense. The other thing, it's the human thing to do as well. We don't want to be injuring our workers, even inadvertently. So can you think of anything in your life, work, relationships, how you think, feel or act that doesn't involve your brain? So it's a very important part of our body, but again, it's one of those things that we've probably, as far as addressing safety, we've come to the table a little bit late. And as we said, why? Well, it's a legal requirement. So well-being, we're going to look at what we mean by mental health, well-being. These are all terms that we've used a lot lately, and they're becoming more prevalent, aren't they? The researchers who contribute to the World Health Organization, these are what they determine to be the domains of well-being, those areas of life that we need to have in balance in order to, I guess, enjoy a life where we're able to meet the everyday challenges in life, to make good decisions and live comfortably and well. Now, academic and career, where you learn, where you earn, your physical well-being, it's a bit hard to feel flash if you're not well in your body. Social connections are important. Environmental, where you live, work and play, how safe, secure and supported are you in those areas? Financial, spiritual well-being, what connects you to something greater than yourself? What gives your life value and meaning? And your mental well-being, which is what we're going to look at today. How easily are you able to problem solve, make good decisions and mount those challenges? Now, this little self-test that you see up on the screen, this is a tool that you can download off my website, and the address is there on the screen for you. I would urge you to download that and take that little test yourself, and maybe it's a useful tool that you can use with your employees to introduce the topic of mental health, having them check in regularly with themselves, how they're feeling, scoring themselves on a score from 1 to 10. If 1's pretty ordinary and 10's feeling great, where do they put themselves within the last week? And on the printable version, there are some steps that they can take next. So that might be a good little tool for you that you're welcome to download and use to be able to introduce the topic in your team meetings and so forth. When we talk about mental health, though, what do we mean by mental health? Well, just as physical health is different to physical illness, mental health is also different to mental illness. We can have good mental health, we can have poor mental health, and we can have mental illness. And poor mental health is pretty common. You know, we all go through tough times in life where, you know, adverse events happen to you one after the other, or, you know, too much stress. Stress can play a big part. And just as poor physical health makes you more susceptible to a physical illness, poor mental health can do the same. But mental illness itself is a diagnosable health condition. It actually involves changes in the brain, and it causes changes in emotions, thinking, and behaviours. Some of the more common, well, actually, I guess the prevalence of it, 1 in 5 Australians, and these statistics are pre-COVID statistics, so we know that that's going to be increased with COVID. Mental illness affects 1 in 5 people in any year. And over a lifetime, 45% of us will experience at least one episode of a mental illness. So it's a lot more prevalent than people think. Some of the more common mental illnesses that you might have heard of, these are the more frequently seen. And I guess to talk about a mental illness, it's a diagnosable health condition that meets certain criteria, but there are only 3 health professionals that can diagnose a mental illness. So can anybody think about who they might be? Just have a think about that for a second. And if you said a GP, a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist, you'd be right. Now, a psychiatrist and a psychiatrist, and a GP, they actually are both medical doctors first, and then the psychiatrist goes on to do many more years of study around mental illness. And they're the only two professionals who can prescribe medication. A psychologist will work more, they can diagnose the illness, but they will work more with therapy. So the best portal into health services, mental health services, usually via the GP, to arrange a mental health plan, which will then allow subsidised visits to one of the other mental health professionals. Just to look at what actually creates a mental illness. When we think about mental illness, there are areas of the brain that are actually affected. So it's more than just feeling a little bit down, or, you know, my footy team lost on the weekend, I'm depressed, or I've got a big test coming up, I'm anxious. A mental disorder is where those feelings persist for a longer period of time, and they're usually prompted by changes in the brain, chemical changes and neurological changes. Now, what you're seeing on the screen there at the moment are representative of what we all have. Between 80 to 100 billion of these tiny little thin invisible strands that transmit and receive messages in the brain, and they utilize electrical impulses and the chemicals that you see represented there in order to transmit from one neuron to another. Now, in the brain of some people, those neurons can become damaged, or those chemicals, we might have too many of the wrong type of chemicals or not enough of the right ones. And that can lead to the illness of depression, where messages just aren't able to get through. So, you know, it's not a matter of saying to somebody, just think positively. If the person has depression, their thinking can be impaired because the messages have to go a long way round to get where they need to go. The other part of the brain that can become affected is this tiny little organ that you see represented there, little almond-shaped organ called the amygdala. Super important, this little part of the brain. In fact, it's so important, it's the very first part of your brain that will develop in the womb. And its primary purpose is to keep you safe. And it lives downstairs. If we look at the brain as two parts, this wrist part being the brainstem, the downstairs part of the brain where the amygdala lives, alongside the part of your brain that creates and stores memories. Emotions also live tucked in under there, and they're kept in check by the upstairs part of the brain, this frontal part that does the thinking, the logic, the problem solving, the very last part of our brain that develops. But that's the part that we want to be in control. But the amygdala is programmed that if it perceives a threat, whether it's real, imaginary, whether it's psychological, physical, or verbal, it will spring into action, and it jumps up from downstairs and it takes over the brain in a nanosecond. Now, what it does then, it starts a whole process in your body to keep you safe. It will start, your heart rate will elevate, you'll get a shot of adrenaline, cortisol will start to pump through your system, out to your muscles. You'll start to shallow breathe to keep your heart rate elevated. And that's to put us into that mode of what we call fight, flight, or freeze. You know, to run from the saber-toothed tiger, to put up the dukes, or to freeze and become immobile. You have no control over that reaction. The amygdala will then go checking with its mates downstairs, and it will say, look, you know, what do we know about this event? What's happened in the past? What's our memory telling us? What are our emotions telling us? If there's no threat, the amygdala should disengage. The thinking part of the brain takes back over. We go on as normal. But like any part of the body that is over-exercised, it can grow and develop, and it becomes stronger and bigger, and it can stay in control long after the threat has passed. So let's think about the amygdala in the brain of somebody who's experienced in their life trauma, neglect, abuse, dysfunctional family life, poor relationships, financial pressure, too much workplace stress, bullying, harassment, and so it goes. That amygdala can become stronger and stronger, and it can stay engaged long after the threat has passed. And that creates an anxiety disorder where the person's unable to feel safe. And there's a range of illnesses that come under that umbrella. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what's actually happening in the body of somebody with a mental disorder. It's much more than just being in the mind. So some of the risk factors that can increase risk for poor mental health, they can, you know, we don't really know what causes a mental illness, but the answers do lie in the circumstances that in which we're born, in which we grow and live, work and age. And those things can either enable us to thrive or not. So physical factors, things to do with the body, our psychological well-being, the decisions we make, our problem solving, our self-esteem, our temperament, and social factors. They can all play a really big part. And again, we've all heard these terms a little bit too much in the last few years, haven't we? Look at what's been happening in Australia, the COVID effect as well. There wouldn't be too many businesses or enterprises that aren't feeling the effects of the last 2 years. I know I am in my business in a number of ways, so I'm sure you are too. Uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen next. Again, that's putting that little amygdala into a bit of an overactive state for all of us. Plus, we're all grieving. You know, we're grieving as humans do. Anything that we intrinsically lose that we value, we grieve that loss. So all of those things are having an impact. So at the moment, we're all kind of walking around in that slightly engaged state. So we need to be mindful of the effects that might be having on somebody who's already facing challenges as far as their mental health might go. So the impact on your employees. Now, I mean, you know, some of these things that we just looked at, the workplace can't be expected to fix all of those things, but this is what's going to come to work with you and your employees, because we can't separate that out. So the impact, it can have, from a recent employee outlook survey, this is the impact of poor mental health on people and the percentage of people impacted by those by mental illness and the percentage of impacts that it has. So workplace wellbeing plays a really vital part in this. And I guess because it can be quite a challenging area, it's probably one of the areas that workplaces tend to or have tended in the past to avoid. But we can't avoid it any longer. We do need to be in front of this, because at some point, if you haven't had to deal with it already, you certainly will. So the most effective way, I guess, of developing a mental health strategy for your workplace is taking an integrated approach that considers and addresses these three key areas. It doesn't need to be huge, but if you have an integrated approach, it's going to make sure that you're covering all the bases and that people aren't falling through the cracks. So promoting positive mental health. Now, that's not legally mandated, but it makes good business sense. Making it okay for employees to talk about their mental health. We want them to be able to disclose, the sooner the better. We need to get in front of it. Making sure that people have literacy about what does good mental health mean? How do they obtain it? How do they maintain it? The bottom two tiers, they are legally mandated to prevent harm in the workplace, as we saw earlier, and also to manage illnesses and incidents, and to provide support for employees to stay at work or to continue to do their job by making reasonable changes. And that might be such as flexible working arrangements or change of work duties where possible. That's legally mandated, as it is for any disability or any illness. So it's important that we understand how to, I guess, recognise signs if somebody's not travelling too well, and how would we have those conversations. And if you're not confident, that's a skill that you can learn. Now, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. I do deliver mental health first aid training, which I'd highly recommend to everybody, not only because I deliver it, but it's a skill that you need. It's a skill for life. I often do training with work groups where everybody in the place has done physical first aid. And when I ask the question, how many of you have had to use it? You know, fairly small percentage. Those who have done mental health first aid, most of them have opportunities to use it. So I'd really urge you to look into that. And we will send out some details after this about some of the upcoming public mental health first aid courses that you might be able to attend. So what employees want, a recent workplace survey in 2019 indicated that this is what employees are looking for. So you might think about, how can you make that happen in your workplace? How can you help employees to be able to open up and talk about their mental health? And often that comes from you, people leaders, people, business owners. How you talk about it and how you model good self-care will often be how your employees will do the same. Clearer information about supports. Where do they go to get support? Now, again, on my website, on the resources page, there is a sheet of useful contacts. So if you're about to have a conversation with somebody, you can just print that straight off the website, and that will give you some avenues that you might be able to get some support as well. And providing training about mental health issues, just the same as we provide training around physical safety, we need to be doing that about mental wellbeing as well. So it's often presumed that a worker's mental illness starts at home and it develops outside the workplace, and that's where it resides. It doesn't really stay in those compartments. This is what people bring to work with them. We all do, we're human, we can't separate those out. But these are some of the risks that can impact in the workplace. And that's where we spend a lot of our lives. So the first step to creating a mentally healthy workplace is really to be aware of and try and reduce any of these risk factors where you can. Now, these are some of the more common ones. These where there's an imbalance in job design, where the person maybe not resourced in order to do the job properly. Do they have the skills, the training, the tools that they need? Do they have the time frame to meet the deadlines that they've been given? Are they being well utilised as well? You know, do you know what your people are capable of, and are you utilising all their skills and talents? Occupational uncertainty. There's a big casualisation, and we've seen that over the last 20, 30 years, haven't we, in the workplace? Occupational uncertainty. Once you got a job, you kept it for life. Nowadays, it's not the same. So there is high uncertainty and high risk. Even for those of us who run our own business, you know, we're certainly taking on challenges. And perceived lack of value. And that can be the lack of value in the work. You know, the job I do is meaningless. It doesn't have a lot of value, or maybe not feeling valued as an employee. I'm just a number. I wouldn't be missed. You know, years ago, I worked for a very large direct marketing company. And the manager there was inducting, we used to mail out, like do lots of mail outs, hundreds of thousands of items a day. And we had a big production area downstairs. And I went down, I was working in sales at the time, and the production manager was inducting a new employee. And this employee's job, his sole purpose, was to pull a lever, to wrap things in plastic. That's all he did, 8 hours a day, just pull a lever. Pretty simple induction, you'd think. But what this manager did, and I still remember it as being one of the best, I guess, examples of good management. He took that employee down to the print shop where we printed the items for mailing. He showed him what they went through, where they were stored, how the storeman retrieved the goods to take to the production line. And he walked that employee all the way down the production line to every person, each station, had them describe their job, what their role was, what their function, showed him where he would stand. And then he took him beyond that. And this is what will happen if those things don't get wrapped properly. And if those mail items don't get delivered, as a sales executive, what would that impact? How would that impact on my customers and on the sales team who had to bring that customer on board? Great management. A simple job, but it has meaning and it has purpose. And that manager gave that employee his why and let him see the value in what he did. Really, really clever management. So these are the things that you need to be across as business owners, business leaders, to make sure that you're aware. Some of these risks we can't eliminate, but we need to be mindful of how they might be impacting on staff and try and mitigate those risks where you can. Small business as well, unique pressure for small businesses. You know, sometimes feeling that pressure to work when you're sick, all of those things. Estimating, project management, general management, accounting, cash flow, you become a jack of all trades. And often small businesses will have fewer resources, less people, and less time to manage some of those challenges. So it pays to do a little bit of a review from time to time and just take note of where can we be aware of those things? What can we do? Now, because of possible fluctuations in mood and the ability to process job-specific duties, that can often be the first sign that an employee might be struggling with a mental health challenge. So it might be that change in behaviour or a drop in work performance. Now, performance management, that aims to change the way that an employee delivers their job description, basically through goal setting, feedback, and so forth. Mental health support aims to assist an employee to become more aware of the factors that might be adversely affecting their well-being and connecting them up to the appropriate help that they need, and perhaps even making adjustments within the workplace to allow them to meet the requirements of their role. Now, under the law, you are entitled to apply your standard performance management processes where you have a legitimate concern about a worker's performance. But you do need to take into account any of those factors, personal circumstances or any health issues, mental or physical, that might be impacting. So my advice is always rule it out. And understand that an employee doesn't necessarily need to disclose, but they do have an obligation under workplace health and safety that if they're aware that continuing in that role or continuing to put themselves at risk, they might exacerbate their condition or they might prove a risk to other people. They do have an legal obligation then to let you know. So as a manager and as a business owner, you really have these 5 key tasks. And again, I think this will come out. Lauren, you're going to send this out to people, I believe. So I hope you can see all that screen. I should have dropped it down a bit. But these are the 5 key tasks that you need to be across. If somebody has a mental illness and presents in the workplace as a manager or a team leader, recognising the signs of a potential mental health issue with the person, having a conversation with that person to invite disclosure and to assess the capabilities to do the job. Identifying core requirements. You might hear the term inherent requirements. They are the core features of the job that can't be changed, the fundamentals. For example, workplace health and safety, that's an inherent requirement of any job description. We have to be able to work safely, so that can't be changed. So identifying and do this with the worker. What are the core requirements in their job description that have to be met, that can't be changed? And then looking at ways, legally, there is a legal requirement here, to make reasonable adjustments to allow that person to meet those core requirements of the job. So for example, a truck driver that can't drive the truck, that's a core requirement for that role. That person may need to be redeployed or perhaps find other employment. Sometimes that can happen. But the 2 legal, I guess, concepts that you need to be across are those: identifying those inherent requirements, and then where possible, making reasonable adjustments to allow the worker to meet those core requirements. Now, a reasonable adjustment is anything that doesn't cause unjustifiable hardship on the organisation. So once you've made those adjustments, and you can then assess with the employee, are they now able to meet the core requirements of the job? So there's a review process to go through. And at the same time, managing that impact on other staff to prevent harassment, victimisation, or to prevent the fallout of them possibly needing to readjust and work around somebody with a mental health issue. Just the same as there may be extra duties for somebody with to support somebody with a physical illness, same thing. So they're really your 5 key tasks: to recognise, have the conversation, identify the core requirements and look at options for flexible adjustments. Ask the person, what do they need? Often you'll find that the adjustments for a mental illness can be a lot less onerous and a lot less costly than those for a physical disability. And then managing that after the event to make sure that that person's now able to meet the core requirements and managing the other staff around them. We know from long experience with health and safety that people are best served by recovery at work. We don't want people to take time off work unless they really need to. We want them to be able to recover and rehabilitate at work. And it's exactly the same with a mental illness. Don't assume that your worker needs time off, and don't necessarily assume that they need to have less duties. That can make the person feel quite disempowered. Ask them, what do you think you need? This is what needs to happen. How can we make that happen? What adjustments can we make for you? But in the event that the person does need to take some time off work, my advice is always manage the absence before it starts, where you can. Actively manage the absence. Consider what factors might be happening in the workplace, and start to manage the return to work process before the person actually goes off. How will they be contacted during their period of absence? Who will make that contact? Who's the appropriate person? What frequency? Don't be a stranger. If you would send a get well card to somebody with a physical illness, send one to somebody with a mental illness. It's no different. When the person's ready to come back to work, think about how you're going to manage that return to work process. Think about the impact on that person the first day back at work. How might they feel? Do they need a support buddy for the day? Do they need to come back part-time? Just like physical illness, they don't have to be 100% to return to work. The sooner we can get people back to work and rehabilitate at work, the better the outcome. So develop that return to work plan with the person and let your staff know if you need time off because you're ill, this is how we'll manage it when you come back to work. Let them know that they will be supported in that and encourage support from other people. You aren't able to disclose anybody's mental illness without their consent. So sometimes you do need to manage around that, and that can be difficult. You also need to be aware that if you're making flexible arrangements for somebody with a mental illness, that in the delivery of those flexible supports, that might also pose a disclosure risk with other staff. So you might need to discuss that with the person, how you're going to manage that. And it's perfectly acceptable to talk to a health provider to find out either the persons with their written consent or a rehabilitation provider can give you some ideas and some support around this issue as well. So the other thing to do when the employee is off sick, you need to make them aware of what their obligation is to, or their responsibility to keep you informed of the reasons why they're sick and their expected return as when they know how long the absence will be and when they expect to return. They do have an obligation to keep you notified. So, you know, a good mental health, a place where mental health is I guess, respected and rewarded is where people feel good about coming to work, where people are encouraged and supported, and people with mental health conditions are supported. We need to make it okay for people to tell us that they aren't okay. You know, so often people they won't hesitate to come and tell us that they need to go to the dentist or to go to the doctor, but to come and tell us that they need time off to go to the psychologist or to see a mental health professional, not always quite so comfortable. And we need to eliminate that stigma as much as possible in the workplace, and that often comes through education and building up literacy. And again, as leaders, how you talk about mental health and the way you model that in the workplace, super important. And again, you know, we know that attracting and retaining good people is difficult. It's tough. So, you know, good mentally healthy workplaces are going to attract and retain the right people, and that's what we want long term. So as we saw, $2.30 for $1 investment, it's a pretty good return on investment for every dollar that you invest in this space. So a good workplace mental health, it's good for people and it's good for business as well. But again, the most important thing when you're running a business is that you take time out to look after yourself. Your mental health is important. And I think, you know, it's often said, and please don't try it at home. I think it's a bit of an urban myth, but there's an analogy that says, you know, if you put a frog into hot water, that little frog will jump straight back out. But if you put a frog into cold water and then slowly turn up the heat, that little frog will sit there until it nearly boils. And I think sometimes as business owners and business leaders, sometimes we can get to be a little bit like that frog. You know, we sit there until we're nearly boiling. We take on more pressure, more stress, more work. And we don't always stop and say, how am I feeling? How am I doing? So I would urge you to download that little wellbeing checklist off my website and just take time out to do that for yourself. How are you traveling? When was the last time you stopped and asked yourself, how am I feeling? We have a national day, don't we? We say to people, are you okay? So are you okay? You need to check it out. And if not, do something about it, because your mental well-being, you can't do anything without your brain. So it's the most important part of our body that we do need to keep firing, I guess, on all cylinders. And some of the ways that we can do that, these are the 5 ways to well-being. You know, we talked about those little neurotransmitters, you know, that course through our body that transmit messages from one neuron to the other. And there are ways that we can create good and healthy neurotransmitters for our brain. Good, simple, little easy ways. And these 5 ways, if we take 5 every day to put these into action, staying connected with other people, super important. So think about ways to develop relationships around you. And again, you can download this sheet as well. There's a the 5 Ways to Wellbeing worksheet on my website, which again, you feel free to print off as a resource. There's some little ideas around some of these things on that. But ways that you can stay connected to other people and develop your relationships with people around you. There was a lady recently who had become very isolated during COVID. She was having her groceries delivered and dropped at the front porch. She wasn't seeing people for weeks at a time. And when we spoke, I asked her if she was having her newspaper delivered every day, and she was. She didn't live too far from the shop. She wasn't terribly mobile, but she could walk to the shop each day. So we talked about the fact that if she cancelled her newspaper subscription and she walked to the shop, at least she'd get to say hello to the lady in the shop each day. I rang her a few months ago and she was too busy to talk, couldn't talk to me. She was just off down to the shop. The woman who runs the shop does macrame and is making some pot holders. A lady 3 doors down that she'd never spoken to but got to meet on her daily walk to the shop grows succulent plants, as does she. So they've formed a little group and they're now going to be potting up and making macrame holders to sell their little pot plants at the markets together. Great social connections just from one simple change in her life. So social connections are important, connecting up. Keep on learning. When we keep learning and trying something new, and again, connecting and learning provides us with our reward chemical, dopamine, a very powerful neurotransmitter, and it's our reward pleasure center. It makes us feel good. So try something new. You know, we've got the internet at our fingertips. Learn more about something that actually interests you. Take time out to do that. And again, when you learn something new and you take on a new task, you learn it, your brain will reward you with dopamine. Being active does the same thing, but being active also produces 2 other very powerful neurotransmitters, serotonin, which we commonly find in antidepressant medication, and also endorphins, which help us to relieve pain. So any activity, extra and additional activity that you can take on board, that's going to help you out and help your brain to function as well. Taking notice, being curious about what's around you. And again, another great dopamine producer. Notice the beauty of everyday moments as well as the unusual. You know, take notice about you as well, of yourself. How do you feel? And what's right with you and your life? It's very easy for us sometimes, isn't it, to get focused on what's not right, but what is going right? What do you feel good about? And that's going to give you a little shot of dopamine for free. And giving to other people, you know, even the smallest act of kindness, when we do something for other people, we secrete a chemical called oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone. And again, a really powerful neurotransmitter. So taking 5 every day, just to do each of these little steps, finding ways that you can do that is going to help keep your brain active and healthy and hopefully keep you well during some what can be very challenging times. So I guess that brings us to the end of this session. If you would like to find out more about available training, training is available for delivery in-house, and I do run public training as well. The 2 public courses that I run are mental health first aid training and managing mental health, managing mental wellbeing, what managers need to know. That's a 4-hour course. And if you'd like to go onto that mailing list, then please do get in touch either with Lauren or with myself through the website, and we'll pop you onto that mailing list to keep you updated about any upcoming training in your area.